Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I'm Vince D'Addario. That guy right there is Ryan Roberts. We're teaming up for the 1 o'clock show, and I haven't been on a 1 o'clock show in God knows how long. So I'm usually handing out suspensions like candy right about now. Or I'm on lunchroom duty doing whatever. But I'm excited. I get to be on the 1 o'clock show again on a Tuesday in December. So it is officially game week. Ryan, I know you guys had a show yesterday, but this is my first go at it. I've got the show right now, and then I'll be back with Sean Stiers for IB Nation Sports Talk at 6. So I'm pulling double duty today, but I'm fired up because we actually get to talk about a game, which I'm fired up about, man. And I've been kind of diving into South Carolina all morning, watching film, trying to figure out who's going to play, who's not going to play, all of these different things. And at the end of the day, I think this is a great matchup for Notre Dame. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. We get to watch Notre Dame one more time for this year. I mean, come on. Doesn't get any better than that. We only get minimum we get is 12 games of Notre Dame a year. We get a 13th game. I'm fired up. What say you about, kind of everything that's going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for both sides of this matchup, there's a lot of things riding on this football game, Vince. I mean, if you look at from the South Carolina side, and I know we'll talk about it a little more in depth, but they are ending the season off on a really strong stretch as far as the regular season game over the last two games, beating Tennessee the way they did, and then beating Clemson. And if they were able to beat Notre Dame in a bowl game, I mean, if you beat 3 straight weeks, Tennessee, Clemson, and Notre Dame to end your season, you start looking at Shane Beamer like it's got stuff rolling in the right direction, obviously, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
I think South Carolina hopes to continue that momentum into the offseason. And for Notre Dame, it's the difference between 9-4 and 8-5. We've talked about that obviously over the last few weeks and the implications and kind of just the perception of the difference between the record. And I think for Notre Dame now going into year 2 under Marcus Freeman with the excitement that, was around the program before the season, and then you lost a little bit of the luster, but I think kind of getting that momentum back after Notre Dame did play well for the most part down the stretch outside of the USC game. It finished 8-2 the last 10 games. Obviously, going into the USC game, you felt pretty good about where the program was going. They lose that football game, but I think ending the season off on a high note against a SEC opponent in South Carolina that has all the momentum on their side the last 2 games of the season, plus the recruiting implications of everything with, we've been very vocal and honest about this, and I think South Carolina would be honest about this too. Like they have a little bit of the NIL implications on their side, right? They do a little bit of the handout things to some recruits, including, some stuff behind the scenes with some Notre Dame recruits in the past, right? So I think that it's an opportunity for Notre Dame to beat a good football team that's coming off of a couple very high quality wins and to beat a team that is utilizing NIL in a completely different capacity on the recruiting side. So I think both teams have a lot riding on this game.
I agree with you, and I think that the South Carolina program is on the rise and it's an SEC program. I mean, it checks a lot of boxes for an opponent that you would like to see in the postseason. I mean, obviously, it doesn't check the playoff box. It doesn't check the New Year's Six box. I get that, but when you're 8-4, you get what you get. You don't throw a fit, as I like to tell my kids. You know what I mean? It's like you are matched up against a team, depending on what ranking you're looking at, 19, 20, 2019, whatever the case may be. I mean, I think this is about the best that Notre Dame could have done, considering where they were with an 8-4 record. And with the way things went down this year, some of their losses were really bad, right?
Yes.
And, you can't sugarcoat that. They're 8-4. And so I think a Gator Bowl appearance against a up-and-coming, you could debate quality football team, but I think they are heading in that direction. I actually really like Shane Beamer as a head coach. I think he's young. I think he's enthusiastic. I think, obviously he brings a great special teams program to South Carolina. They proved that this year, and we can talk about that as we move forward as well. But there's a lot to like about this South Carolina program. And if Notre Dame is able to come out victorious in this matchup, it checks a lot of boxes as a quality win for Notre Dame moving into the offseason. Absolutely. And so I'm actually more excited about this matchup than I would have been if Notre Dame was in the playoff, or not in the playoff, excuse me, in a New Year's Six game, because really the only slot for them would have been to face off against Tulane.
Right.
Is that really a great matchup? Like one that you're excited to see? Yes, it's Notre Dame football. We all get excited to watch them play and all of that. Yes, they would have gotten the New Year's Six monkey off their back most likely. But at the same time, I like this matchup better than the matchup against the Green Wave of Tulane. So, am I a glass half full guy right now? Maybe. But as far as just the actual football game itself, the game that is played on the field, I'm happy with this matchup.
Yeah, I am too, Vince. I think that it's going to be a really interesting one for all the implications I already talked about and some of the players missing from both sides of this matchup as well. And I think there's going to be a lot of, from a Notre Dame and South Carolina perspective, trying to find a little bit of a new identity in 15 bowl practices and trying to really urge towards the 2023 season and finishing off 2022 on the right note. So I'm excited to talk about this matchup. Yep. I know we have to throw out a reminder, and I'll do this for us real quick, that I know everybody in the chat wants to talk about Sam Hartman and the news that's been kind of dropping over the Twitterverse and everything. I'll say this for the exact info about the Sam Hartman stuff now that he has entered the portal for Wake Forest. You can go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. Only a little bit ago, Brian Driscoll put up a little bit of an intel piece on Sam Hartman and a potential fit with Notre Dame if that is the direction that it might be going from both sides. So if you want to go check it out on the message board, we're not going to dive into that conversation today because this is game week and we want to finish off the season the right way, obviously, and give this massive bowl matchup the attention that it deserves. But trust me, when the dust has settled a little bit on the whole conversation, we will dive into the backstory and the implications and the impact that move can potentially have. But go to boards.irishbreakdown.com for that information.
Because look, Sam Hartman isn't committing anywhere until at the very least after Notre Dame's bowl game. And so there's nothing to really talk about yet. And as excited as people may want to be or unexcited as people may want to be, that is a conversation that we will, of course, have probably starting during the post-game show, maybe after that. On the 31st moving forward. So we will have that conversation, of course. There'll be a nice discussion over there on the board. So head over there if you want to have your Sam Hartman, chat. But he's not making any moves between now and Notre Dame's bowl game. So what are we going to focus on? We are going to focus on the Gator Bowl and South Carolina Gamecocks and everything that goes along with that. And this show specifically, Ryan, and we're going to kind of jump into this one and kind of what we had planned before all this Sam Hartman news kind of dropped. But we are going to, let me pull up the outline here because, I don't want to stray because I have a tendency to do so. Yeah, it is what it is, right? But we are going to jump right in. So let's talk about the Gator Bowl specifically from a South Carolina standpoint. We're not really going to be talking Notre Dame. We're going to talk South Carolina. I've been cramming over there all morning for this one, watching some tape and trying to get an idea of who's playing, who's not. But Gator Bowl, it's going to be on ESPN. It is going to be at 3:30 Eastern time. It is in Jacksonville, Florida, where the Jacksonville Jaguars play their game. Let's see, 3:30 in the afternoon. Have you seen an up-to-date spread on this game, Ryan? I haven't really looked into that yet. I can pull it up real fast.
Yeah, I want to say it opens. Was it Notre Dame favored by 6 to open?
Is that what it is?
Right?
That sounds about right.
I think that's what it was. Almost positive, but I'll check on it too.
Okay, so that sounds about right. Notre Dame, I think, and as we kind of go along and we talk about who South Carolina is going to have playing in this game, who's not going to be playing in this game, et cetera, I think that line makes a lot more sense moving forward. I think if both teams were full strength, I think that number maybe is a little bit smaller. But obviously Notre Dame is dealing with some opt-outs, and frankly, South Carolina is dealing with about 3 times as many opt-outs as Notre Dame is from an impact player standpoint. Because Notre Dame has some transfers, obviously, but they're not impact players to this game. Notre Dame has 2 opt-outs that would have impacted this game, right? I mean, Foskey and Mayer. Other than that, well, Drew Pine, I guess. I'm sorry. So 3 opt-outs that are affecting this game in a very specific way. South Carolina has a lot more than that. So there's going to be a lot of speculation on our part as to what the South Carolina team is going to look like. Yeah,
no, it's going to be super interesting to see because we've seen, Vince, it makes it really cloudy when you're talking about the South Carolina team a little bit, right? Because you have all your talking points and you've seen like the kind of throughout the entirety of the year. And I know, watching the film over the last few days for both of us, you're evaluating a lot of players that just aren't going to be on the field for Notre Dame, for South Carolina, excuse me. So it's a murky one because I mean we're going to dive in obviously to a lot of the schematic approaches that South Carolina uses, a lot of the philosophy stuff, which is going to remain the same. But I mean, the point blank period to it is that they are going to have some players out that is going to structurally change how they do things or how they operate. It is. We'll talk about the 2 tight ends that are out in this football game right here in a little bit. And I mean, no, I don't think that South Carolina was going to be a team that was going to run so much light personnel compared to maybe some more heavier personnel. But out of necessity, I think they're going to have to utilize less tight ends in this football game. So it's going to – we're almost left predicting. Like, I feel like we're getting our crystal ball out a little bit and saying, like, hey, man, these guys aren't playing, but they might be this. We'll see type of thing. But it's going to be a fascinating conversation because we're either going to look very smart for predicting some things or we're just going to be kind of left – aimlessly pointing a little bit because there's really no way to purely speculate on these things because so many football players have just opt out for South Carolina that it makes it a little hairy on what exactly you're going to see from the Gamecocks.
Well, and Katie Keevers makes a great point. Opt-outs are why bowl games are not even fun to watch anymore. Look, you make a really good point, Katie, and I can't say that I disagree with you in any way because I haven't really dove into a bunch of the bowl games this year. Now, granted, the big ones are still yet to come, the ones that are really a lot of people want to sit back and watch. But if we're talking about this game specifically, as I'm watching, for example, I'm watching the South Carolina-Clemson game, and I'm watching some of the things that they're doing defensively to Clemson. I'm watching some of the things they're doing offensively to Clemson. They may not do those things because a lot of the guys they were counting on to make those schemes work are not playing in this game. And so you're almost looking at completely different teams moving forward. Now, Notre Dame losing Mayer and Foskey, that's not going to change their defensive philosophy really at all, I wouldn't think. Offensively, obviously, they can't focus on the tight end as much as they did in the past when Michael Mayer was out there catching balls. And it's not going to change the offensive philosophy.
And you only have 2 healthy tight ends for Notre Dame, right? With Kane Barong transferring and Kevin Bauman being injured and Eli Raritan being out, you have Holden Stace and you have Mitchell Evans. Like those are your tight ends in this football game. So, I mean, unless we're counting Davis Sherwood as a tight end, I consider him more of a fullback H-back type, right? But I mean, you really only have 2 healthy tight ends in this football game if you're Notre Dame. So it's going to change things on both sides of the coin. Quick update, Vince. I was completely wrong with my spread, so please ignore me. Notre Dame is 2.5-point favorites, not 6. I don't know where I got that 6 number, but that's where we are right now.
Okay, so 2.5 points. That is actually very interesting to me because I feel – now, from a point scoring standpoint, if you're in Vegas and you see that Michael Mayer is opting out, you automatically think there's not going to be as many points scored for Notre Dame. So I get that part of it. But there's a lot of opt-outs on the South Carolina side that I think is really going to affect this game on both sides of the ball. So, and we'll get into that. So let's talk about this South Carolina team, Ryan. We talked about the opt-outs. We can get into specifics a little bit later, but you mentioned the fact that their last 2 games have been, 2 of the biggest wins in recent history for South Carolina. They snapped a 7-game losing streak to Clemson with the win at Clemson, which also snapped a 40-game home win streak for Clemson, which I thought was very interesting. They hadn't lost there since October of 2016. And then South Carolina comes in and Spencer Rattler and whatever the heck he was doing in the Clemson game got him the victory. So they're riding high right now. And then you add in the big win that they had over Tennessee, the second to last game of the season. And this South Carolina team is absolutely dangerous. Now, it changes because of some of the opt-outs, but they still have Spencer Rattler back there. They still got Shane Beamer as head coach. And as I look at this South Carolina team and what they're going to be able to do to Notre Dame specifically, there's 2 things that scare me. Number 1, special teams. Number 2, Spencer Rattler. Because I don't know what Spencer Rattler we're going to get, if I'm being honest. I mean, you get it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with him as far like even in the game itself. He just about lost that game for them, and then he also just about won the game for them. So it's like, which Spencer Rattler are you going to get from series to series, game to game? I mean, He was a 60% passer going into the Tennessee game, and he threw for 81% and was unbelievable. I think he had like 7 incompletions the entire game. And then he goes into the Clemson game, and he was average at best. I mean, threw 2 really, really bad interceptions. One was a pick six, one was in the end zone. So, I mean, those were really, really bad interceptions, took points off the board, put them over on Clemson's side. But then you also look at their special teams, man, and holy cow, I've got a special teamer living in my house, and he's watching the game with me. He's like, dude, that punter is automatic, and they haven't missed a field goal in over a year. So, I mean, wild. They have the number 1 special teams unit for a reason.
Yeah. And those are the things that are going to be a couple really interesting storylines. I mean, backtracking the quarterback for a second, Vince. I mean,
yeah.
I think that Tennessee game where they won, was it 63-38, something like that, like some crazy number. And that was the Spencer Rattler that a lot of people thought they were going to get before last season. You know, right. I mean, those early mock drafts in the preseason are always kind of dumb, to be honest, and a lot of speculation because the media doesn't really have a great sense most of the time as far as what the NFL actually thinks. But Spencer Rattler, I mean, was the number 1 overall quarterback for a lot of them from the media side going into that year, and then kind of falls flat on his face his last year at Oklahoma, you know, and he struggles, and Caleb Williams takes over, and we know the whole story. But throughout the majority of this season, Spencer Rattler hasn't been very good for South Carolina. He really hasn't. But whatever clicked in that Tennessee game for him, that was the best game I've ever seen Spencer play, bar none. I mean, like you said, I mean, the kid had almost as many touchdowns as incompletions that game. He threw 6 touchdowns and had 7 incompletions. It was like 31 out of 38 for over 400 yards. So he was just absolutely fantastic in that football game. And then I agree, the Clemson game, it was a little bit up and down, you know, a couple of bad interceptions, but throughout the stretch of the second half, he played his best football, which got them the win, obviously, because they were down against Clemson. So the last 2 games have been Spencer Rattler's best games for a 2-game stretch as a member of South Carolina, and one of the best stretches he's had in his college career. I know he had some nice success in his redshirt freshman year, you know, specifically the last 6 games of that season. But Spencer Rattler is a very volatile player. He's very, you know, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He is that type of dude. But when he's on, he's one of the most talented quarterbacks in college football. Like, there's no doubt. That kid, ball comes out of his hand different, right? Like, he has an NFL arm. The ball comes out with easy velocity. But then there will be games where he just doesn't seem like he understands what's happening in front of him, and he'll just make some boneheaded decisions. But the fact of the matter is that we saw this last bowl game with Notre Dame, right? When they played against Spencer Sanders. Spencer Sanders is a little bit of the same thing for Oklahoma State last year. Spencer Sanders, at times, is a really, really good quarterback. And at times, he's unplayable almost with the interceptions and the bad decisions he makes. Spencer Rattler is the same type of volatile. But unfortunately for Notre Dame in the last bowl season, they got the good the good Spencer Sanders in that football game down the stretch when it mattered most. And now you're wondering with the skill position, because that's the one thing that stayed intact for South Carolina pretty much, is that the wide receivers, for the most part, are intact for this football game. We'll talk about the tight ends, obviously, that will not be available in this football game. But Spencer's got some players to work with. He's got some pass game weapons, Antoine Wells, maybe Josh Vann. But you just don't know what to expect from him, right? And then the good versus good on special teams is going to be interesting, man, because, I mean, we've applauded Brian Mason the entirety of the year, and his units have been very clean. Outside of the kick return game, they've been consistent pretty much all around from a punting perspective. Kicking perspective has been a little shaky, but pretty decent for the most part. You've blocked a ton of punts, obviously, in that regard as well. But then you're faced against Pete Lembo in that units for South Carolina, who just doesn't make any mistakes either. So I feel like there's going to be a make it or break it play in special teams on one side or the other. You know, who's going to make the big mistake, who's going to, you know, muff a punt, who's going to get a field goal block, a punt block, whatever it is. I think there's going to be a make it or break it conversation for the special teams at some point in this game.
Yes, I completely agree with that. This game, I think it's going to be won or loss based on the special teams. You've got 2 top 6 special teams units. Notre Dame's number 6. And South Carolina's number 1. And there's a reason. If you watch their special teams, and I realize a lot of people don't get too excited about watching special teams, and I understand that. But, man, watching what they can do special teams-wise, number 1, they just don't make mistakes. And number two, they not only do they not make mistakes, they just make plays. I mean, the return game is impressive. The punt and kicking game is impressive. The coverage units are extremely impressive. They don't let you get anything in the return game. And that's called field position. And I know that that's boring football stuff to talk about, but field position is really, really important. And we would all be fooling ourselves if we said, we're super confident in what Notre Dame's offense is going to be able to do offensively. We just, they're going to have a quarterback that we haven't seen since the middle of September coming off of an injury. Mm-hmm. They're not going to have their best offensive player in Michael Mayer.
Yep.
What's the offense going to look like? Are we confident they're going to be able to take long fields and drawn out drives and all of these different things? If I said yes, if I said I was confident in that just makes me look like a homer. You know what I mean? Right. So the field position game is going to be incredibly important in this game. And I'm telling you, man, this special teams unit for South Carolina is really, really good. Clemson was backed up to their own end zone on numerous occasions. And when I say backed up, the backfield was in the end zone to start drives. That's really hard to overcome multiple times a game.
Yep. And I mean, they consistently do that, man. They consistently do it. Because like you said about the punting game for them, I mean, they had their kid that was up for the Ray Guy Award, right, as a finalist. I mean, he's a fantastic punter. They haven't missed a field. Would you say they haven't missed a field goal in over a year or something like that, right?
Over a year, they haven't missed a field goal.
It's absolutely wild.
And the one they missed was a 58-yarder to win the game or whatever. That was the one that they missed before the streak started. So it's if this is a field goal game, I don't like Notre Dame's chances. Okay. They've got to really, as far as that's not comparing Notre Dame's kicker to their kicker. But what I'm saying is if they're at 50 or in, it's a done deal. You don't want them driving at the end of the game is what I'm saying. So it's going to be, and look, if we're going to go to the other side of the coin, John Sott's a really good punter too.
Yes.
He's a really good punter. So we're going to see some really good special teams in this game. And frankly, I'm excited to watch it, but I think this game is going to be made or won or lost based on a special teams play here, there, whether it's pinning him deep, whether it's coverage, whether it's whatever, a field goal. Special teams are going to be really, really important in this game.
I think so. And I think a note that you made, Vince, I know we're not focusing too much on Notre Dame today. This is more of a South Carolina-centric podcast, but with Tyler Buchner now coming back and, getting his first start since September, right? You also want to make things kind of easy for this offense because I think that there is going to be a new identity that's going to be kind of forged a little bit, right? This offense is not going to run through the tight end position as much as it did. It's going to run through wide receiver centric a little bit more, the run game centric, but the run game's even going to look maybe slightly different from it, just a schematic approach with Tyler Buchner in there comparative to what Drew Pine was. So I think that setting it up in advantageous field position is going to be a big time opportunity. I think for me, again, it comes back to the mistakes. What special team is going to make a mistake? Because I think that the experience from this season, just kind of evaluating both sides, they don't make a ton of errors, right? There's not they don't get punts blocked, they don't get field goals blocked, they don't really do things to hurt themselves. Correct. So I think that's the breaking point for me is what special teams makes the mistake, doesn't have good lane integrity as a kick coverage unit and gives up a kickoff return for a decent game to set up field position. Who doesn't have good discipline as far as staying outside and working outside in against a punt return, for instance? I think that there's going to be a play in this game on special teams that's really going to be the make it or break it for this game. I really do.
If you watch the Clemson South Carolina game, and I know I harken back to that's the most recent game that I watched, but they forced, so because of how good South Carolina's special teams are, they forced Clemson to do some things on special teams that they don't normally do. They did that thing on a kick return where they all come into a group and you don't know who has the ball and they all just spread out. So they did. So Clemson does that. They fumble the ball and turn it over, deep in their own territory. That's mistake number one. They did a quick punt with DJ Uiagalelei because they were afraid of, getting a punt blocked or whatever. They end up kicking it into the end zone, touchback. They kept their defense out on a punt return. Not even worried about returning it. They just don't want to be faked out. So they are constantly thinking about what South Carolina was going to do to them in special teams. And then they were even doing some different things to try to combat it. And they're just outside of what they do. And so not only does South Carolina do a good job with what they do, but they force you to do things that you're not prepared to do. Now, I don't see that being the case for Notre Dame. Notre Dame's going to do what they do. They're not going to be forced to do anything they don't want to do based on special teams and what South Carolina is going to do. But remember, even in the USC game against Notre Dame, it was a brilliant move by USC to go to the quick punt against Notre Dame because Notre Dame couldn't block that, And so it's going to be interesting to see how the special teams shake out. I know we're harping on special teams and nobody cares about special teams. I get that, but it's going to be a make or break situation in this game. I'm just saying. So
well, we had to know that Vince D'Addario is on the show. We're going to talk about special teams, man. It's going to happen.
Right.
It's going to happen.
Absolutely.
And you should, man. That's the profile, brother. I love it.
And this game's going to be that at 2 top 6 special teams. You know what I mean? So we got to talk about it, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. But
well, according to Big Game Boomer on Twitter, Brian Mason's only the 12th best special teams coach in America. So I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Does he at least have South Carolina 1, like the South
He
Carolina?
did.
Okay,
Pete Lembo was number 1, as he should be. But
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good Lord. All right. So let's jump into some more specifics. Ryan, let's talk about who is in, who is out for South Carolina, specifically who's opting out, who's injured. I saw because you had mentioned the Van kid who's a wide receiver. We can start with him because he's kind of like the tweener, I guess, because we don't think he's going to play because of injury, but he is listed on the depth chart, unlike all the other guys that have opted out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting situation because Josh Van has been kind of beat up all year a little bit. Like he's kind of missed some time sporadically.
He's a good receiver though, man. Like
he's a good receiver.
Yeah, he's a good receiver.
He had some NFL buzz before the season, but he's been banged up obviously before during the season. And we had saw a report that Josh Van wasn't going to play and that he was kind of banged up, still dealing with injuries. But then he was on the depth chart that was released by South Carolina. So I still don't buy it 100%. I mean, there's always deflection and all that stuff from that that mental side of the coaching profession, right? So I'm not buying in that Josh Van is playing, but he is a part of the depth chart. So it's one of those things where you just have to evaluate and see, like, is it a limited capacity? Is he going to play at all? I think that there's just, we're just trying to feel through the kind of that situation. But as of right now, I wouldn't expect him to play, but he's on the depth chart. So we have to at least account for him right now.
And like I said, he's a good, not great wide receiver. He made a great play in the Clemson game, but then he got hurt on that play and had to sit out the rest of the game. So, he's an athletic receiver. He's kind of a long, he's got those long attributes. He's fairly fast. He's able to get, behind the Clemson secondary on that play. So, he's a guy that you have to account for. They got him in the old or category on the depth chart. So, again, is it some gamesmanship with South Carolina? Probably. But he's still on the depth chart, so we got to talk about him. But as far as I will kind of pass the baton, kind of go through who's out, and then we can talk about who's going to replace and what does that mean for the offense. Then we'll switch over and do the defense.
Yeah, I mean, so offensively, they remain intact with a lot of players. Specifically, like I think Antoine Wells is a great player that's going to be playing for them and is going to be available for the football game. But the most notable players that will not be available for South Carolina is Marshawn Lloyd, their running back who was their leading rusher this year, former top recruit who opted out and I believe is in the transfer portal still at this point. So he is not going to be available in this football game. Their leading rusher. And then their top 2 tight ends offensively are also opted out of this football game. So they're going to be without Jaheim Bell, who's already made the decision in the transfer portal to go to Florida State. He was actually weird, Vince. I mean, he's a tight end kind of move piece, but they also throw him at running back. They threw him at running back this year at times because they had some injuries at running back, and he's just kind of that type of athlete, right? So Jaheim Bell is at Florida State, and then Austin Stogner, who was the former Oklahoma transfer, is transferring back to Oklahoma.
That was
for
weird.
Whatever. Yeah, it's very strange. So they're going to be without their top 2 tight ends in this game. They're going to be out without their top running back and Marshawn Lloyd, and maybe also out with Josh Vann, obviously.
Well, and what's interesting, so number one, you mentioned Jaheim Bell, and as I was doing my research on South Carolina, I was like, I texted you guys, I was like, are you guys sure he's a tight end? He's got 68 carries. Like, how does that work? How do you get 68 carries as a tight end? But they just kind of use him in a funny way, and they've had some issues at running back, and so he's an athlete. They put the ball in his hands. He had a rushing touchdown against Clemson. So so that is a loss when you have a kid that can play multiple positions. That's a huge loss for this Gamecock offense. So and then at tight end, you said the 2 guys have opted out. They literally have 1 tight end on the depth chart. 1. And he's the son of the offensive line coach. His name is Nate Adkins. Made a great catch in the Clemson game, a little one-handed behind the back kind of a thing. So, I mean, the kid can play, but wouldn't anticipate a whole lot of 12 or 13 personnel in this game with 1 guy on the depth chart. So, a lot of 10 personnel, as you had mentioned in our little group text, and they ran a lot of empty against Clemson as well. So, I would assume that they're going to test Notre Dame's secondary, run some empty, run some 10. They're just not going to have a lot of tight ends on the field, doesn't seem like.
No, I think that structurally this team is going to be a lot more wide open of an offense in this game. Because like you said, I mean, with 1 really healthy tight end, and I mean, Atkins has 8 catches for 90 yards on the season, so it's not like he can't catch the football, right? Like he's going to be utilized in this football game a little bit, but I would think that you'd be looking a lot more 11 personnel, a lot more 10 personnel, keeping minimal tight ends on the field, if any, at times. Because I think the one thing, Vince, that they do have, South Carolina, is they can supplement some of that work in the passing game because they do have a couple interesting slot receivers that I think can offer production. So it's going to look different than maybe what they would want. I mean, when you told me during the season that if Notre Dame was playing South Carolina in the bowl game, I'd be like, okay, you need to match up against Austin Stogner, who's 6'6", 260, as kind of their inline tight end, and the Jaheim Bell, who's 6'3", 230, more of a move piece. And you can do a lot of things with that 12 personnel variation. But now that you are sitting there with no tight end outside of Nate Atkins, you're like, okay, you literally just can't do some things that you were doing during the season. So I would expect a lot more 11. I would expect a lot more 10. I would expect minimal tight end usage in this game, obviously.
Yeah, and Atkins isn't somebody that scares you going down the field. Yes, he had the nice one-handed catch, but he strikes me, as I watch him, he strikes me more of an H-back that can catch the ball, but not a tight end that's going to stretch the field on you. He's definitely not a matchup nightmare for the Notre Dame defense, in my opinion. So, I'm not overly worried about Atkins as far as being an offensive threat. But when you're the only tight end on the depth chart, it's going to be interesting to see who plays and how they play it. As far as what they're going to do at running back, you've got the classic Orr on the depth chart. You've got Juju McDowell, who is a 5'9", 180-pound sophomore. And then Christian Beal-Smith. He's also 5'9", but 205 pounds. He's a fifth-year graduate student as well. So your thoughts on those 2 guys?
Well, I think the running back usage really comes down to the offensive line for me. And the offensive line has not been great this year. It's kind of a bigger offensive line. I think kind of lacks foot quickness. And they just haven't been a great running team, even with Marshawn Lloyd this year. I mean, Marshawn's a little over 5 yards a carry this year. He was a pretty good football player. But, I mean, they just have not been a consistent running team overall. But I will say this, Vince, from a skill set perspective, it's an interesting 1-2 punch because Juju McDowell is more of that space kid at 5'9", 180 pounds. He's got a little bit of juice to him. He can kind of work through some tight spaces and work in space a little bit, which is interesting. And then Christian Beal-Smith is a kid that has played a lot of football in college football. I mean, he's been banged up a lot this year, but he's a season removed from being Wake Forest's number 1 running back in 2021. So he's a kid that's played a lot of football. He's much different than McDowell in the sense that he is you mentioned 5'9", 205, but he runs angry, and he's a more physical runner. He breaks a lot of tackles. So I think he's a pretty solid football player. For me, though, in this football game, those 2 running backs should not scare you as Notre Dame, but you need to take care of business, right? Like, you can't let those guys have a ton of success because right now you're going to have an advantage from a run stopping perspective against what South Carolina has offensively as a rushing attack. So they supplement with two solid, decent, talented running backs in Christian Beal-Smith and Juju McDowell, but certainly Marshawn Lloyd was easily their most productive running back this year.
Gotcha.
I mean, literally, their second leading rusher was Jaheim Bell this year. I mean, put in the context, right?
Right. Yeah. He's the tight end. Yeah. I mean, he's listed as a tight end. So, I mean, it just. So anyway, let's move to the offensive. Well, yeah, I want to talk about the offensive line real quick, and then we'll move out to wide receivers. But the offensive line, I can't put my finger on the offensive line, to be perfectly honest with you. At times, it's a beautiful pocket in pass protection. They're able to do a lot of things in the pass game, sometimes with only five blockers, because a lot of times they'll send their running backs out on routes and they just leave the 5 in to block. And it looks good. Spencer Rattler's got a nice clean pocket, able to really just sit back there and do what he wants. And then at other times, they just look very porous to me. And so it's hard to put my finger on this offensive line. As far as the run game is concerned, they didn't run the ball very well against Clemson. That's for darn sure. They just didn't really do much on the ground. It was a very pass-heavy offensive game plan, so it was hard to get a finger on that. But this offensive line is solid, but there's definitely some holes that Notre Dame can take advantage of, in my opinion.
I think so. I mean, this is a typical South Carolina line, in my opinion. I mean, even when you think back to a few years ago when they had guys like Brandon Shell, who has played in the NFL for a little bit, like they have some size to them, right? They have some size, they have some length. They're big bodies. It's just, I just don't think they're incredibly talented football players, right? Like I don't think they move particularly well. I don't think they work in unison particularly well. It's a big line. So like, you know, if a guy's playing, if Notre Dame's going to play any 2-gap style where they're playing, you know, straight down a man, I think that they're going to have to bring their lunch pail a little bit because this is a powerful offensive line when they get in right body positioning. I just don't think it's a particularly talented one to get right in the positioning all the time. So again, I think there's a clear advantage from a Notre Dame defensive line versus South Carolina offensive line. And we'll talk about a lot more about that later in the week. But again, you can't let a non-strength for South Carolina be a strength because they've struggled to run the football this year. And they've been mostly okay in pass protection, but we have seen, Vince, I mean, Spencer Rattler is not very good when handling pressure. And he's gotten some pressure on him this year, obviously, from the South Carolina offensive line. So I agree that there is a lot of size up front. It's not the worst unit that Notre Dame has played against, obviously, but it's definitely not one that should be overly concerning for you at the top of the list anyway.
I agree. And while Notre Dame is obviously missing Isaiah Foskey, I still think this team can put some pressure on Spencer Rattler, on this offensive line. And I think South Carolina is going to be forced to keep some guys into block. And that is obviously going to help Notre Dame moving forward. But this isn't about Notre Dame. This is about South Carolina. I keep reminding myself of that. Wide receiver-wise, one of the things that South Carolina just loves to do is just get the ball out of Spencer Rattler's hands and get it in space. So whether that is just some simple wide receiver screens, whether it's some now screens, whether it's some RPO action, some quick slants over the middle, which gets Spencer Rattler in some trouble. But they don't want Spencer Rattler holding on to the ball. They want to get the ball out in space. They want to get the ball in the hands of their wide receivers. As you had mentioned previously, they do have some talent at wide receiver. I think Antoine Wells Jr. is probably the best receiver that they're going to have that is going to play. One thing I thought was interesting, just based on some of the games that I was watching, Jalen Brooks is really fast. Number 13, he's a fifth-year kid. He's not even listed on the depth chart. They ran a reverse with him against Clemson. The kid's got some wheels. And so you're going to have to look out for these wide receivers and what they're able to do. But the bottom line is they want to get the ball in the wide receiver's hands out in space.
Yeah, I mean, it all starts with Antoine Wells. I mean, coming into the year, you thought it was going to be Josh Vann, but with the injuries and just kind of the nagging injuries he had, Antoine Wells was actually a transfer from James Madison and came over to South Carolina. He was a really nice player at James Madison when they were on the FCS level. Obviously, took the jump up to the FBS this year, but he was their best player this year from a wide receiver perspective. He was really good consistently all year. He's got a little bit of twitch to him. He's got a little bit of length to him. He's not the longest guy in the world, but he's got a little bit. He just kind of is one of those players that's just kind of an all-around good football player. Like there's not one trait where I think you watch Antoine Wells and say he's exceptional at, but he's just pretty good at everything. Like he's one of those players, and he can hurt you, obviously, and he has hurt a lot of good football teams this year. I mean, he had a heck of a game against Tennessee, for instance. I think he had like 11 catches for over 170 yards. So when he's playing well and they're in unison, I think he does some really nice stuff, obviously. Vince, one guy that worries me a little bit is the Kerryon Joyner as well, he's a little bit of a slot receiver, former quarterback. I mean, last year he had to play quarterback in the bowl game, and he was like 9 for 9 passing in their bowl win last year. Like, he's much more of a wildcat option player when he has to play quarterback, but he's kind of a gadget player that can move around a little bit, can do some things. So even though South Carolina may not have Josh Vann, doesn't have both the tight ends, you mentioned Jalen Brooks as well. I do think they have a lot of talent at wide receiver still, and there's certainly a lot of players that Notre Dame is going to have to account for because there are guys that can hurt you when they get into space.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And this is a wide receiving core that it's not like one guy that you have to shut down, that you have to bracket, that you have to be scared of. They've got a bunch of guys that are just pretty good, and they can beat you. And if you forget about one guy, then that guy can beat you, right? I mean, they're going to scheme up to get certain guys open. Like there was one play in the Clemson game where it was 4th and short. They had a full house backfield. They snuck a running back out, hit him deep. That almost was a touchdown. And of course, that's when Spencer Rattler threw the interception. But they will scheme to get guys open. It's not going to be a situation where they're going to force feed one guy or two guys the football. They're going to spread the ball around because they don't have a front runner at wide receiver per se. So it is going to be difficult for Notre Dame to be successful at times because they can't just focus on one guy. You could turn you could flip the script and say, well, the same thing goes for anybody that's playing Notre Dame because normally you focus on Michael Mayer and he's not going to be there. So it's the same kind of a situation. I think that they have guys that are very comparable to Notre Dame from a wide receiver standpoint, at least from a production standpoint. They're going to try to spread the ball out and make things happen that way. And no one has opted out at the wide receiver area. Or the wide receiver room. We have the injury, obviously, to the Van kid. But that's it. So they want to get the ball in their wide receivers' hands. And I would be shocked if that was any different in this game, moving forward.
Vince, can I give you a great stat? I just love random tidbits. So last year in the bowl game, to Kerryon Joyner, who was a former quarterback, now playing wide receiver, he was 9 for 9 passing in that game. Only 9 passes he threw all last year, by the way, for 160 yards and a touchdown. This year, he's thrown 5 passes, 4 out of 5 for 97 yards and another touchdown. So averaging over 23 yards per attempt this year, over 20 last year. So my man over the last 2 years as a gadget player has thrown 14 passes. He's completed 13 of them, 13 out of 14. Decent percentage, right? Not too bad for 257 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he interesting little gadget player there, man. Sorry, it was just really random, but I was looking at the stats and it was
that's unbelievable.
Interesting. Yeah,
it's unbelievable. So in other words, watch out for like a reverse pass or something.
Exactly. I mean, last year again in that bowl game, he was 9 for 9 passing, but then he also ran for like 70-something yards as kind of a more of a wildcat quarterback as well. So he's a pretty interesting player. South Carolina just doesn't feature him for whatever reason, but he's a guy to keep an eye on because he's got a little bit of that. Whoa, what's he doing? There he's throwing over your head type of feel to him. So
yeah, no doubt about it. And they when they did run Wildcat, they had Marshawn Lloyd back there as their Wildcat quarterback, and obviously he's listed as a running back. So it'll be interesting to see if they go Wildcat because they did that an awful lot down in the red zone. So a lot of wrinkles for the South Carolina offense. So it's going to be interesting to see, how they go about some things. More interestingly to me, Ryan, are the opt-outs on the defensive side of the ball, because to me, the way they want to play defense or the way that they played defense this year was very much predicated on 2 of the guys that are not going to be playing in this game. So are they going to continue doing that, or is it going to be a completely different look? And that is because their top 2 corners are going to sit this one out.
Did South Carolina play defense this year? I really
I'm just kidding. Had 11 guys out there. I mean,
they had 11 guys out there. That's a very good way to put it. But I mean, all joking aside for a second, They weren't incredibly impressive from a run stopping perspective this year. They were a much better pass defense this year, but a couple opt-outs to kind of keep a close eye on is in the secondary is kind of the biggest hits. So they have Cam Smith, who was their top corner, opted out of this football game to start preparing for the NFL draft, a kid that is projected to go in the first or second round this year, so a very talented football player. Darius Rush, who's the corner on the other side of him, number 28, also opted out of this football game. He's heading to Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl as well. He's a little bit of a longer kid, a little longer than Cam Smith, not quite as twitched up as Cam is, but South Carolina's going to be without their top two corners in this football game.
Yeah.
And then Zach Pickens is, for a struggling run defense that South Carolina has, Zach Pickens is easily their best player on this front seven this year. He was a defensive tackle number 6. He's a bigger body guy, nice length for the interior. He is also opting out to prep for the draft as well. He's a kid that is probably going to hear his name called sometime in the first 3 to 4 rounds of the draft as well. So you have 3 guys for South Carolina, 2 that are going to be pretty highly drafted and 3 overall that are probably going to hear their name in April preparing for the draft. And obviously they're all really big losses for South Carolina defensively.
Absolutely. And when you talk about the scheme that they generally like to employ, they like to play a lot of man-to-man. And there were times that I saw a decent chunk of zero coverage. That means no safety, lined up man-to-man across the board because they want to stop the run. And if I'm playing Notre Dame, what is my primary goal? It's going to be to stop the run. And so without your top 2 corners, are you still going to put those guys on an island? I think there's definitely a possibility of that. I really do like the Marcellus Dial. I think he's a pretty decent corner. He's probably moved up to now being their number 1 corner. He's 6 foot, 192-pound junior out of South Carolina. I think he's pretty decent. Are you going to trust this kid? Are you going to trust O'Donnell Fortune, who's a sophomore, who's going to be starting at corner now? You're going to trust those guys on the outside? Look, Notre Dame's wide receivers, I mean, what have they done to really scare you from a production standpoint as you're watching the film? Now, Ryan and myself and Brian and Sean, we all know that there's talent at the wide receiver position for Notre Dame, but have they really put that on film? Have they really shown that from a production standpoint?
Right.
Not really. And they haven't shown that they can get them the ball when they are open. And so now you've got a brand new starting quarterback. And those who don't pay enough of attention are going to see Tyler Buckner like he's a run-first quarterback. We need to stop the run. And so I think there's going to be one-on-one opportunities out there for Notre Dame. They're going to put those guys on an island. They're going to load the box. They're going to make Notre Dame throw the football until they prove that they can throw the football. And so I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity, Ryan. What do you think they're going to do from a secondary standpoint against this Notre Dame team?
Well, I mean, we talked about it a little bit in the group chat earlier. And I mean, so just kind of some context, throughout most of the year, they've been a heavy man team and they'll run a lot of cover 4 stuff as well, and including some match quarters coverage as well. So a lot of man principles for this team. And I mean, Vince, part of me says, I think that if I'm South Carolina's defensive coordinator, just personally, I look at, the Tyler Buckner coming back, inexperienced quarterback still. And I look at a bunch of young receivers and I say, I'm still going to play a lot of man and a lot of match coverage until they show that they can beat me, or until Tyler Buckner shows that he is healthy and the same dynamic runner or the willingness to run the same as he was before this most recent injury, right? So the man coverage can hurt you because you're going to, it's man coverage, right? So I don't have to explain to people out there it's one-on-one, right? So if a Tobias Merriweather or Deion Colsey end up making a couple plays vertically, for instance, right? Then you have to start rethinking, hey, maybe I need to play a little more too high. And even if it's, 2-man instead of just cover 1 type of thing, I need to start doing different things to stop those types of opportunities for Notre Dame that has some taller, more athletic receivers, right? But that's a challenge that I would take if I'm South Carolina, because you have to show me that you can make that play. And then the other thing that man does is against an athletic quarterback who can scramble and can do things as an improviser, man coverage stinks, because man coverage, the principle is that you're turning your back to the quarterback, right?
Exactly.
So the minute you take your back to the quarterback, that's when a quarterback has an opportunity to run the football and be a dynamic player with his legs. So, but I think that for me, even though there's challenges exist from a man perspective, being just an outsider looking in, I would say I would still play a lot of man until Notre Dame shows that they can beat me. And then from there, you try to mix and match some zone coverage into your man principles. I think about it like what happened with Tyler Buckner last year at Virginia Tech. I mean, he was killing them early on, and then they started mixing up coverage a little bit and threw in some zone on top of their man principle stuff. And that's really what I think confused Notre Dame a little bit in that football game specifically. So I think that you're going to have a similar structure. I think ultimately when the game's over, as long as Notre Dame can show they can make some plays in the passing game, I think you're going to see a heavy mix of man and zone coverage. But I think early on in this football game, Notre Dame has to show that they can beat man coverage, or else there's no reason for South Carolina to really get out of it.
Completely agree with you. I mean, that's going to be the biggest thing. That's been the recipe to defeat Notre Dame for the last, 3, 4, 5 years, is stop the run, force them to pass the ball. And if they can, then they're going to be successful. If they can't, they're not. I mean, it's really just that simple. And Notre Dame needs to prove, Tyler Buckner needs to prove that he can throw the football accurately and he can move the ball down the field and take advantage of the fact that when those corners do have their backs to the line of scrimmage, that you can take advantage of that, right?
Yep.
The Notre Dame's running backs are real good out of the backfield. Get them the football.
Yep.
This South Carolina, they're going to load the box. They're going to do some things with their front seven, but I still think running the ball right at them is going to be one of their biggest weaknesses. That has proven to be the case most of the year. I mean, to be honest with you, from a rushing standpoint, I mean, they're giving up, 192 yards a game.
Yeah.
Run right at these guys. I mean, I think that is what is going, and then you got their best front seven guy. He's not even going to participate in this game. So I think you run right at him and you take your chances. And yes, of course, you need to stretch the field. You need to throw the football. Load the box, baby. Bring it on. Yep. And this offensive line, these running backs, this quarterback, I think can take advantage of the run game against South Carolina.
And I'll say this, Vince, the last thing to the man versus zone conversation for me, because I think you make a great note about, how Notre Dame should attack them, but because what's going to happen, I think, especially if South Carolina is going to play a lot of man coverage in this football game, is one thing that they are not very good at defensively outside of stopping the run is they've not really created a lot of pressure on the quarterback this year. Like they don't have a ton of sacks to their credit. So the one other good thing about man coverage is there's a lot more opportunities to create pressure, right? And some pressure packages and kind of manufacture pressure a little bit more. So if you're going to see some man, I would expect maybe a lot of blitzing from the second level, some movement up front, those types of things. If Notre Dame makes them uncomfortable, gets them out of their man looks and makes them do a lot more zone, then you're left with a lot more four-man pressures from South Carolina to try to get home with four. And I don't think that's how they win. So I mean, we'll do a key for victory, obviously, show later in the week, but I think a big key for victory, just for a little bit of insight for me, is to get South Carolina uncomfortable and out of man coverage, I think plays into Notre Dame's favor big time.
I do too. And Notre Dame is going to be at full strength from a wide receiver standpoint. Tobias Merriweather comes back. I still love the big package of Merriweather and Colsey on the field at the same time. Those things excite me. And I also think that Braden Lenzy, this is probably his swan song in a Notre Dame uniform. This dude has been trying to make plays all year. Throw him the ball. And I think he can take advantage of whatever corner lines up against him in man-to-man. You have to be able to take advantage of that. I think Lindsey's going to be able to run by some guys. I think the big wide receivers are going to be able to take advantage. And so, this South Carolina defense doesn't necessarily scare me, but it really just depends on what they want to do, missing their top two corners and that kind of a thing. So, look, the offensive game plan for Notre Dame is going to be simple, in my opinion. You got to run the ball. You have to establish the run. You've got to stretch the field, and they can do that. They're going to be successful against the South Carolina defense. So, I'm excited about it. I think this game sets up very well for Notre Dame. I think that South Carolina is going to get a great opportunity to see some of their younger guys do some things that they haven't been able to do in the past with some of these guys that are sitting out. And we could see a very different South Carolina team than we saw throughout the regular season. But that's what the bowl season is all about these days, is what team shows up based on defections and opt-outs and transfers and all of those things.
It's funny, Vince, though, the offense for Notre Dame, I don't really know what to expect from that unit. So they got me kind of like with some butterflies in my stomach, man. Because I'm very optimistic about what they're going to look like, and what they could be. But I also don't honestly know what to expect from them, right? Like I don't. What's Tyler going to look like first game back? Are they going to utilize Tobias and Deion Colsey the way that we anticipate that they might in this football game? Are they going to utilize the running backs more in the passing game? Where's the supplement of the passing game production that you lost with Michael Mayer? Where's that going to come from? And I think there's a lot of incredible possibilities for the Notre Dame offense, but I also don't know 100% what to expect. So I feel like I'm very just anxious, I guess is the best word, to see what it looks like, because I think it's a great opportunity to kind of develop a new wrinkle to your identity, but I have no idea what exactly it's going to look like. So it's going to be interesting, man.
It's going to be fun. I mean, just from we don't really know what South Carolina is going to look like. There's a lot of those questions that we can use for Notre Dame. And obviously we're going to get into the specifics of Notre Dame as we move through the week. But it is game prep week, baby. And we'll have wall-to-wall coverage for you guys. Again, tonight I will be with Sean Stiers at 6 o'clock as we continue to break down this matchup between Notre Dame and South Carolina. We've got some fun stuff. He just sent me the outline during the show, so I haven't really had an opportunity to look at it, but I know we're going to have some fun tonight at 6 o'clock, so make sure you stay tuned for that. I believe you guys are going to be back tomorrow with a 1 o'clock show, yes?
Yep, we'll be 1 o'clock the rest of the week, and I mean, Vince, I implore people to please stay tuned to the message boards at irishbreakdown.com, to the coverage we have, because it's going to be – you want to talk about just covering the bowl game. I mean, Brian will be down there, obviously, in Florida to take in the Gator Bowl firsthand. But, I mean, then we have the Under Armour All-American game and the All-American Bowl out in San Antonio, Texas over the next couple of weeks. So it is going to be a busy couple weeks for Irish Breakdown family. So make sure to stay tuned to the coverage. It's going to be.
Are you heading out to either one of those games?
I'm going to be in San Antonio for the All-American Bowl. I will be out there. Yep.
Nice.
Yep. Well, Kenny Minchie, man. Get to see Kenny Minchie and 7 other players live in that football game. So it's going to be exciting.
I always love those games when they get everybody together that's committed to the same school, and they do like the little media hits and the whatever. It's like, okay, Notre Dame's well represented here. Let's go. Let's have some fun with this thing.
Vince, they have 3 guys down for the Under Armour game in Florida, which isn't like the highest total, but they have 8 in the San Antonio in one game in San Antonio. So Notre Dame is going to be very well represented from a recruiting perspective.
Still 11 guys that are playing in one of these All-Star games.
11 out of 24 are in the 2 major All-Star games for context. Yes, absolutely.
Which is awesome. So make sure you stay tuned to that. Check out the boards. There's plenty of Sam Hartman information over on the board. So make sure you check that out. We're going to kind of turn the page. We're going to do a little bit of a mailbag here, Ryan. And I've started a couple of questions that I think we can answer, at least to get things kicked off. If you want to stay in the starred section, I'll star some stuff. And we want to go that route, and you can bring them up, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, man. Sounds good. So let's get into the mailbag for today. Vince, I guess we'll start with Dexter Domer. Yes, it's for Brian, but of course Ryan and Vince are here today. So we'll take this one. Do you get to watch any of the practices for bowl prep? Was the question from Dexter.
So they altered the schedule a little bit. There was supposed to be, I believe, 2 practices that were open, at least the beginning of the practice, the FSA, and then a couple of the individual periods. But then we got a revised schedule that they downsized that to 1 practice, and that practice was yesterday. And so Brian is not down in Florida, and even if he was, there's not a whole lot to see when you're just watching them warm up. And so he will be down there in a couple of days, I do believe. I think he's going down on Thursday, and so he'll be down there for the game. So no practices are really open. I mean, it's not like we get to sit there and watch the entire practice. So every question that goes along with that, like how does Tyler Buckner look, and all of those different things, we have no answers to those questions. We can only go by what the coaches say. A lot of coach availability. We'll obviously have all that coverage on irishbreakdown.com as well as the message board, but no specific practice openings.
And how does Tyler Buckner look? We'll know on Friday.
Yes, we will.
Leave it there.
And we're all going to be excited to see it. I mean, we're all kind of in the same boat with you guys, us. We'll see.
That's it, man. From Irish Blooded, and thank you for the question, by the way. How honest do you think the depth chart is at linebacker, and does it surprise or disappoint you that the linebacker chart is listed like it is? Vince, I mean, can I start us out just by saying
100%.
I think one thing that we have noticed, and this is just from a general perspective, Irish Blooded, is that the depth chart doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't. We have noticed it, I mean, just over the course of the season, the depth chart hasn't changed much, and yet playing time has been distributed differently. So I personally wouldn't read into depth charts too much. You know, I mean, you see stuff, and I don't know if it's always updated as well as it can be, just from a general perspective, not even just from a Notre Dame perspective. Like, I think there's a lot of schools that just don't update it as thoroughly as they can for certain reasons. I mean, there's gamemanship side of things, and then there's just a general who cares type of thing, right? The games matter the most, but I don't care too much about what the depth chart looks now. I care about what it looks like on Friday. And I think that what we see on Friday is going to be different than what we see from the depth chart perspective. That's just my opinion, but it's opinion based upon what has been certain trends over the last few weeks, right? Like, we've seen it. I mean, Deion Colsey has been listed as a starter. He's basically been a starter the last 2 games that he played, though, if we're talking about just distribution of reps. So I personally, Vince, I don't know if you agree, but I don't feed into the depth chart thing too much.
Right. And just as a small example of the entire thing, that, we all have reported and we all know that Junior Tuihalamaka has been practicing at Viper. He's listed as the number 2 middle linebacker. So, I mean, is he cross-training? Could he play middle linebacker? Of course he could. But he hasn't been practicing there. He's been practicing at Viper. So that kind of gives you an idea of maybe how seriously you should take the depth chart, and not to take anything away from the deep dive into the depth chart of South Carolina that we just did. But at the same time, from Notre Dame, I just don't, outside of like deleting guys that are either injured for the year or not available because they're transferring or whatever, it doesn't really change all that much. It just doesn't. So don't put too much stock into it, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. We had a question next from Jason Smith. He said, do you think the 12-team playoff will keep as many guys opting out? So will that change the format of guys opting out as much for the 12-team playoff?
I think to a degree it will. Yeah. And I think that is one of the good things about the 12-team playoff, in my opinion. You're going to get more guys with an opportunity to win a national championship. And most guys who have that opportunity are not going to opt out. They're going to want to stay with their team. They're going to want to have that opportunity to win that national championship. Now, maybe some of those teams that are ranked 9, 10, who maybe don't have as realistic of a shot as some other guys, maybe you see some there. But you're definitely, look, if Notre Dame was a part of the 12-team playoff, which they would not have been if there was still a 12-team playoff, okay? But if they were a part of the 12-team playoff, whether that's in the 9, 10, 11 range, do we think that Mayer and Foskey are going to opt out? I don't. I think they play. And so, because they would have been an away game being down that low, but they would have played it already. I don't think they opt out. I think that they're still playing for this team. So I think that's a great question. And I am very happy that I think we'll be heading in the right direction of guys not opting out.
I mean, because Vince, I can only think of, since the playoffs started, I can only think of one player that has opted out of the playoff game, and that is Jackson Smith-Njigba this year for Ohio State. Even he's dealing, obviously, with the repercussions of coming back from an injury. So I think that generally players care about those types of games, because you still have a puncher's chance and you still have an opportunity to potentially play for a national championship. So I think when the games matter to that degree, I do think that it will cut down on the amount of opt-outs for the top 12 teams, because I think that you will see players care more about the games. The problem is right now is that not a lot of players care about any of these bowl games outside of the 2 playoff games in that matchup, right? So making more games matter, although some people are against 12. I think 12-team is a little too much, if I'm being completely honest, from just a quality of football perspective. But the fact that you're making more games matter, I think, will cut down on how many players opt out in those games. I agree completely.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Jason, thank you for the question. We're going to move on to Jeremy Rhodes had a question. He said, do our young linebackers get more playing time this week? Of course, he's referring to Jalen Sneed, Nolan Ziegler is another player. Prince Kali, sophomore, linebacker for Notre Dame. And I guess we can count Junior Tuihalamaka, even though he is playing mostly Viper during this game.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a good possibility that will be the case. I mean, they're not going to cut off their nose to spite their face. They're not going to just bench guys to get young guys time. I mean, they want to win the game. So whoever they trust the most to be in there is going to play. I would think that at this point in the season, some of those guys will get some extra time. And we all know that, not that it matters, but they passed the rule that the bowl game doesn't count towards redshirting and all of those different things. And so there's really no reason not to get those guys on the field, but I think it's going to be, if they are, there's going to be a plan. You know what I mean? Like it's going to be, okay, third series you're in, fifth series you're in, or whatever the case may be. But I hope so. I mean, we've heard a lot of good things about these young guys. I want to see them on the field. I want to see their athleticism on the field, of course, but I also want to win the game. And if they're athletic and they're running down the ball and they're doing what they're supposed to do and they're getting in the right place, awesome. But if you just put them out there because they're athletic and they don't really know what they're doing, I'd rather than be on the sideline. So it's just kind of a toss-up. But, I mean, and I'm not saying that that's the case. Right. Number one priority is to win the game. Second priority is getting guys in.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, do some of the young linebackers need to play? Absolutely in this football game. I think so. This is what I expect, right? And this is based upon trends that we've seen. Prince Kali has played more football. I expect him to play, and hopefully at a higher rate than he even has over the last few weeks. Jalen Sneed is a player that we saw almost none of early on in the season. The last couple games, you're starting to see a little bit more. I expect him to have more playing time. Now, ultimately, will it happen? I mean, we're speculating at this point, right? We're not in the meeting rooms. We're not watching practice. We don't know what the plan is per se. But I do expect Jalen Sneed to be on the field more than he has. I expect Prince Kali to play football for sure. The fun one, I think, is Nolan Ziegler, because we've heard a lot of good things about him in bowl prep so far. And it's going to be interesting to see if he's used, how he's used, because he's a player that I think some people should be excited about if he does get an opportunity to play. But I mean, again, I think that it's going to be a telling story for Notre Dame on both sides of the football. If they took this opportunity for the 15 practices to truly have those open conversations and do what's best for the team, or if it's just kind of finishing out and then starting fresh in the spring. I think that you have to let those kids play. But again, we'll see on Friday what it looks like. But I think that guys like Prince Kali, Jalen Sneed, Nolan Ziegler, I think they are earning the right to play. So I hope that we do see him on Friday. I do.
It's also from a coaching standpoint. I mean, you can speak to this. You were a linebacker. Like, it's difficult to get a bunch of guys in there. I mean, we're talking about potentially playing 8 different linebackers, 9 different linebackers at times, right? Yeah. That's not an easy thing to juggle either.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No doubt. It's difficult to make, because people say rotate more, but like rotations are tough sometimes, man. Exactly. It's not an exact science. It's really not, because there's a feel to rotating, and it's not like 3 plays, you're out, 3 plays, you're in. It's like there's situations that matter more where you want certain players in. So it's difficult. But again, I hope that the staff does do a better job of getting some younger players in. I do. Vince, I wanted to bring up this one because it made me laugh. Irish Blooded said it's Brian Polian ranked higher. So funny. I need to pull up the list from Big Game Boomer, who had Brian Mason 12th in the list, if I remember correctly. He had Pete Lenbo from South Carolina at number 1, which is very deserving. I was not asking Brian Mason to be number 1 on the list, because Pete is obviously a great special teams coach. So respect to him in that regard. But I do believe that Brian Polian was ranked pretty high. If I remember correctly, I think he was like 16th or something like that. I'm like, guys, wow. Big Game Boomer, tell me you haven't watched football without telling me you haven't watched football. That's an example right there.
Well, some of his lists are just outlandish. They're absolutely ridiculous, and that's why they're fun to bring up, because they're stupid and not even close to reality for the most part. But yeah, that's terrible.
Oh man, it's absolutely wild. I mean, I don't know Brian Polian personally. I'm sure he's a nice man and everything, but he's not a good special teams coach. Like,
he's just not. His family's really nice. His daughter played basketball for me. Super sweet little girl. But his family's super nice. But you can be bad at your job and be a nice person too. I've seen that many times. So
I mean, look at me right now. So
I know you're an a-hole and you're great at your job. I mean, that's.
Oh, I was about to say, hopefully
okay.
people don't agree with what I just said. They were like, yeah, he's really nice, but he sucks at his job. All right. Nick P said, Vince, can we get a IB show where Vince just breaks down special teams, please? Can we make that?
I'd have to get out the whiteboard and we'll talk coverages and all kinds of fun stuff. I'll bring in my son as a special guest since he's a kicker punter, and we'll have some fun with that. So
love it.
Highly doubt that Brian would want that on the channel, but I could do it.
Somebody needs to go on the. If you're on the board at board.irishbreakdown.com, you need to start. Someone needs to go start a post of a petition beginning to let Vince do special teams talk every single week. Someone go do that right now. Do it right now. All right, next one. We had Mr. 2.0. Thank you for the question. He said, Vince, did you have Ron Paulus III in class or coach him at Penn?
No, I've only been at Penn for the last 4.5 months. And of course, we know that RP3 has been at Notre Dame for a couple of years now. I've watched him play many, many times. I've coached against him, but obviously I never had him in class. His little brother is actually a starting linebacker at Penn right now. He's pretty hard-nosed player. But no, I never had RP3. I don't know him very specifically. I've heard stories. Not going to say whether they were good, bad, or indifferent, but no, I never had him at all. So I'll leave it at that.
Gotcha. All right. I'll have to check out his little brother, man. Maybe you piqued my interest a little bit. He's a
little hard-nosed hitter. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's funny because he was a quarterback in middle school. He is a current junior, I believe. So he's the class of 24. And he was a quarterback in middle school, but he's a starting linebacker in a 4-4. I believe he's a middle linebacker too. I believe in a 4-4 defense, and he can hit. I mean, he's undersized. I mean, he's not going to go anywhere, but he's not afraid to hit somebody. That's for sure.
Love it. We had a question from Robert McReynolds. It's a great name, by the way. I've heard a lot of positive talk about Jalen Snead leading up to the bowl game. Is he going to get a chance to start or substantial playing time? I mean, this kind of goes into our linebacker talk a second ago. Robert, I don't expect him to start in the football game, but I expect personally, and there's no intel part of this conversation. It's just about trends, right? Like, I'm a big guy for trends, and the last couple of weeks we've seen more and more of Jalen Snead, so I expect more of him in this football game. And they've had 15 bowl preps to really kind of get him going, acclimate him a little bit into the game plan, right? So I expect to see Jalen a lot more. I don't expect him to start, but I really think that if the coaching staff if they took the 15 practices the way that you typically should, getting guys opportunities to prove themselves again, it's almost like a reset. And I think that Jalen Snead is a player that needs to play football, man. He's probably your most athletic linebacker on the depth chart. So getting him an opportunity to play against the South Carolina team that is going to most likely spread the field a little bit more and work in space a little bit more, I think that getting Jalen Snead in there, for me, Vince, is a necessity in this football game. I really do.
Yeah, I have no problem with it whatsoever. Like I said, I don't think he's going to start, but I think we've heard good things about, both groups, or a lot of the younger guys. And again, we can kind of go through. We already went through kind of the younger guys, and look, I'm excited about the next generation of linebackers at Notre Dame. I don't even know how else to say it. I'm with everybody, but again, your first priority is to win the game. You got to put the guys out there that you want that are going to win the game for you.
Yep, no doubt. So we had a next question from Jason Rose. Hey guys, why does Coach Washington take heat for losing Keon Keeley and Jason Moore, but nobody talks about Coach Dylan McCullough losing Jaden Lamar and Dylan Edwards? I have concerns for Washington, but I'm just curious. Okay, so if I can take this one real quick, Vince.
Yep.
So the difference, Jason, the difference is, and I'm going to start with Coach McCullough, because the big difference is here. One, Dylan Edwards was not recruited to play running back at Notre Dame. He was not. Dylan Edwards was recruited to play a gadget type role, wide receiver mostly, gadget type. So was he going to potentially play some in the backfield? Yes, he was, but he wasn't a true running back. So while Coach McCullough led that recruitment, it's not technically a running back recruit for Notre Dame. That's first. Second is, I think there's context to every recruit that you lose, right?
Absolutely.
Dylan Edwards left for Colorado because of Deion Sanders partly, but then also because of what he was offered. And we've talked about that story, a million times at this point. There are some things that Notre Dame just can't match. And if that is a kid that is driven by money, Notre Dame can't do anything about that, right? So, I don't hold that one especially against Coach McCullough. I don't. The Jaden Lamar one, look, they wanted Jaden Lamar in the class. But the fact that Coach McCullough had done such an incredible job recruiting Jeremiah Love, who I would argue is an elite talent at the position coming out of Christian Brothers in St. Louis, you were okay as a staff letting Jaden Lamar go because he was honest with you. You wish him well. Hopefully he does really well at Oregon, right? So I don't think that you can hold either one of those necessarily against Coach McCullough. But what I can hold against Coach Washington, and this kind of difference is Keon Keeley, I give him a slight pass, not a full pass, because I think there was some things that could have been done better, but Keon didn't leave because he didn't have a good relationship with Al Washington. He left because of the what Alabama could provide for him from the track to the NFL. And then if there was more compensation on the side, we've talked about that. That's part of the conversation. That's part of the conversation. Jason Moore is a big miss by Al Washington. Massive miss. They were leading for Jason Moore when he was hired and missed out on a really good football player that's now going to Ohio State. That's a miss. Braden Fisk was a miss for Al Washington. Brandon Davis Swain decommitting in the 2024 class is also it's a miss for Al Washington, and you aren't trending great with a couple of the high-profile defensive linemen on the board in 2024. It's not just one or two instances for Al Washington. It's kind of like the overarching spectrum of 2023 and 2024 recruiting. There's been a few too many misses already in only a year. D'Lo McCullough, on the other hand, you get Jeremiah Love, elite talents. You got Jabron Payne to come on board very late after he was released from his letter of intent from Indiana last year. You already have a 2024 recruit in Aeneas Williams committed in the class for Notre Dame. So I just think that, it's apples to oranges in this situation. There's been a lot of misses from Coach Washington's side of things, and I just don't think that there's been nearly to that degree with Coach McCullough. He's gotten Jeremiah Love, who I think is an elite level talent. You got Aeneas Williams in the next class. You got Jabron Payne, who was a 4-star level recruit before the injury. So I think that you've gotten 3 very good running backs over the 2022, 2023, and 2024 cycles to Coach McCullough's credit. That's already adding to a really deep running back room. And I think the defensive line room is one that needs to be continued to be upgraded. And you've now missed on Jason Moore, Brandon Davis Swain decommitting. You've gotten late with Justin Scott, a guy that should have been a foregone conclusion to Notre Dame. You missed on Braden Fisk. So I just think that there's more pressure right now for me on where you are from the Al Washington perspective. So
agree. I couldn't have said it better myself. I agree with everything you just said. So good job.
All right. And I guess we can knock this one out real quick, Vince, and just say it's from Nicholas Gross. She said, any more news on Sam Hartman? Will he be an upgrade? If so, why? I think he was trying to say there. So, Nicholas, if you're not signed up at boards.irishbreakdown.com, go sign up now because there is an intel piece on the Sam Hartman situation. We're not going to comment on it because, one, he is not committed to Notre Dame right now. He's in the transfer portal. And we're going to be focused on the bowl game this week on Friday, the Gator Bowl between Notre Dame and South Carolina. But if you want to start to have a conversation piece about Sam Hartman, go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. And then when there is news pertaining to his situation, then we'll comment on it then.
Yep. And there will be plenty of conversation about that moving forward once the bowl game takes place. Because Sam Hartman's not committing anywhere at the very least until after the bowl game. So we'll have plenty of conversation about that moving forward.
No doubt. No doubt. And then we are going to go now. A lot of great questions today, by the way. I just want to throw out this comment. Ryan Loftus said, just tuning in. Great to see Vince in the daytime slot.
Yes, what happens when you get 2 weeks off of your regular job?
Woo! I know. And now Vince has to do double duty. So
it's all back, good. Man. It's all good.
All right. Then we're going to go to Bobby L. Thank you for the question. Getting in here late, but how do you see South Carolina having any way of limiting Notre Dame's running game? Any way of limiting their running game, Vince?
Yeah, I mean, look, the way that they're going to be able to limit Notre Dame's running game is by stacking the box and putting just too many hats in the box. Even then, I still think Notre Dame can have some success in the running game. They give up almost 200 yards a game. Notre Dame has at least 4 games, I want to say, over 200 yards rushing. So, I mean, they're going to run the football. If anybody has been watching Notre Dame this year, that's their first priority, is to run the football. And there's going to be a concerted effort to run the football. And now you have a quarterback that's also going to be involved in the run game. So my suggestion towards Tommy Rees and the offensive game plan, don't get cute in the running game. Just run it straight ahead. That is when teams have had the most success against South Carolina. If you're faking, you're doing all kinds of stuff in the backfield, and you allow South Carolina to bring pressure and get to it, that is when you don't have success. Run it right at them. Power football, run it right. I'm fine with read option. That's still a run it right at them situation, because you can run power read. You can do a lot of different things. You can RPO it. You can do some stuff of that nature, but run it right at this defense, because Notre Dame is more talented in the run game than South Carolina is at stopping the run. It just is. And so the only way that they're going to be able to limit it is they put too many hats in the box, but then Notre Dame has to take advantage passing the game or passing the ball.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that you're going to see South Carolina try to load up the box, to your point, Vince, and try to stop the run that way. I think that there's a world where even if they do that, Notre Dame can still be successful running the football, but I think it comes down to your ability to win outside the numbers a little bit. And that's
right.
As in the passing game, for sure. But then also, I don't want Tyler Buchner to run a ton in this football game.
Right.
But I do want him to be able to pick his spots, so that you have to look at Tyler Buchner as a true threat, right? If he's a true threat, then that extra overhang defender or extra edge defender is going to have to look at him and is going to have to keep contained and not be able to be a guy that can just crash down a ton. So I think that it comes down to the quarterback position, as far as, because I think that's, for me, Vince, like, look, against USC, like, for instance, they didn't run the ball particularly well. They ran the ball okay, but not well.
Right.
And I think that, for me, like, Drew Pine did some nice stuff in the passing game, but he never was enough of a threat in that football game for USC to do anything differently to slow him down. You know, like, they never respected him enough to be like, all right, you're a great passer.
Right.
We're going to vacate the box. Like, that just wasn't the thing for me.
Yep.
So.
Great question, Bobby. Thanks.
Yeah, it was a great question. Nicholas Groach said, okay, can we use a tackle at tight end to run a one?
I guess that's supposed to be by 3, but
1x3 on short yardage, etc.
I mean, you can. I mean, Notre Dame has tight ends. They could bring in an extra tackle. I mean, of course you can do that. You know, run a little king queen or whatever you want to call the unbalanced line, or however you want to do it. But do you need to in this game? I don't know that you do, Ryan. I don't know that gives Notre Dame a huge advantage, to be honest with you.
I don't think you change what you do offensively. I think you change the percentages of what you do, right?
Sure.
A little bit more of maybe a little more zone in this football game from a running perspective, a little more of the true drop back stuff, moving the pocket a little bit in the passing game. So I think you supplement how you run the game as far as your run versus pass ratio. Right. But I don't think you like come out and have to be exotic, right? Like Notre Dame should be able to line up and move the football against South Carolina. I don't think they have to get cute with it, right? And I think even though that's a heavy personnel, so I guess some people would be like, that's not cute. That's like, rough and tough or whatever. But like, it's still anytime you do something that you're not comfortable with and something that's foreign to you, I consider that a little bit of a cute thing.
Yep.
So
I agree with you. And there's going to be, look, it's a bowl game. You've had a month to prepare. There's going to be some wrinkles that we haven't seen from Notre Dame, either offensively or defensively. That's going to happen. Could that be a wrinkle that they have? Maybe they see something in the South Carolina defense where they want to get like Tosh Baker attached to one of the sides. Okay. I mean, if they see something and they think they can take advantage of it, great. I just don't know that gives you a whole lot. But I'm not studying the film as closely as Notre Dame is either. So if they see something where they think that they can do that and they think Tosh can come in and be a better blocker than one of the tight ends, okay. I mean, I'm not against it by any stretch of the imagination. I still think Notre Dame needs to run the ball to win. You know? So that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, if there's short yardage situation where you want to bring Tosh or somebody else like that, to your point, Vincent, to run the football, like, sure, I'm good with that. Yeah, I'm good with that. So
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, want to throw this one up. Craig D, who is a great member of the board, and the chat just said, just hopping on. Hope all had a Merry Christmas. You as well, Craig. Hope you had a good one as well as everybody else out there. Wanted to go to We Are Not Marshalls. Vince, Ryan, how confident are you in this passing attack? Who will be Buckner's security blanket in this game? That's interesting. That is interesting.
Can I hope that he doesn't have a security blanket? Like I hope that he goes through his reads and he throws it to whoever is open. I'm kind of to that degree. I'm glad that Michael Mayer isn't playing. Now, to win the game, I wish Michael Mayer was playing. Okay. But I don't want there to be a security blanket. I want there to be, hey, I need to go through it. I need to figure out who's going to be open, and that's who I'm going to throw it to. I don't want him throwing into double and triple coverage as we saw a lot of times this past year. Okay.
Right.
Because Notre Dame's not going to have a Michael Mayer on the field that can make that a positive for Notre Dame. So I'm hoping there isn't a security blanket. Now, how confident I am in the passing game? I'm still confident in Tyler Buchner as a passer. I am. Saw a lot of it during practice. He's. We'll see. I mean, I don't want to. Again, I don't want to sound like a homer here, but he's a better passer than a lot of people give him credit for, and I hope he's able to put that on display in this game.
Yep. And I mean, Vince, I feel like I'm very hopeful and I don't want to say confident. I am optimistic about several parts of the passing game potentially. Like I am a believer in Tyler Buchner's talents. I am. Sure. If he can put it together, I still think he can be a very good player. I'm a believer in Deion Colzie's talent. I'm a believer in Jaden Thomas at slot receiver. I'm a believer in Tobias Merriweather's talent. I'm a believer in the running backs. I'm a believer in this offensive line. Right. You have all the elements to be a very good passing attack, but how confident am I? I mean, I'm not very confident at all right now. Like, I'm just anxious to see it.
Right. I get that.
Because they have all the talent to do it. It's just you haven't seen it yet, right? So I'm hopeful, but we'll see what happens, obviously. Yeah. Because I think there's a lot of positives parts of this passing attack. I really do. A safety blanket. I know you said that you hope there's not one. I would say for me, I think Deion Colzie has become a little bit of a money player over the last few weeks. Sure. So maybe it's him. Down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're not going to have as much tight end production, maybe Jaden Thomas in the slot could be another guy that might give you something like that. So, all right. Have some more questions rolling in here. Good question, though. We Are Not Marshall. Appreciate you. We're going to go to Billy Platter. What numbers do you think Buchner will put up considering he hasn't really played really this season? You have any predictions for that early, Vince?
First of all, I hate predicting passing game numbers because if you'd have told me that Notre Dame was going to beat Clemson and Drew Pine was going to throw for 95 yards or 85 yards or whatever it was, I'd be like, well, that's not going to happen. So, so predicting passing numbers is really tough. I mean, I would like to see him around the 200-yard mark in passing and about the 50 to 75-yard mark running. I mean, that's what I would like to see. Yeah. It could go either direction, though, if I'm being honest. I mean, he's going to have opportunities to run the ball, but he's definitely going to have opportunities to throw the ball. So I'll put it up like 275 as far as numbers, but it doesn't have to be that for him to be successful. And he could have that exact stat line and look like crap. So, I mean, I need to see the game to really decide whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Right. And I'm going to just completely avoid this question on myself because I'm sure we're going to do a prediction about this at some point.
That's true.
Yeah, that's where I am with it, man. I think that I'm hopeful for what Tyler's going to do in the game, but I'll have a deeper prediction a little later in the week.
Keep him.
I also don't want to jinx it. Is that weird that I don't want to jinx it either?
No. Because this is my only show prior to the game as far as like during the day, except for the pregame show on Friday. So yeah, I'm a little easier going after it, but you guys are going to have a couple shows. So, I feel like I'm keeping the expectations low on it too, Vince, because I just want to be surprised. I want to be surprised in a good way. Yes, exactly. I know. Exactly. We had a question from Irish Blooded who said over under on how many snaps Mitchell Evans takes on short yardage, and for bonus points, how many attempts and completions does he have? I hope they retire the Mitchell Evans on short yardage at this point. At least if it's a yard or more, they need to retire it completely. If it's like an inch, okay. But guess what? You now have a running quarterback. Now, he is not as big and strong and long as Mitchell Evans, so I get why you would have him back there. So I'll take the over-under. I'll put the over-under at like a half, and I'll say over. on snaps he takes on short yardage, and I'll set it the same number at 0.5 for attempts and completions, and I'll say under.
I'm going to say under on the 0.5. I'm going to say Mitchell Evans does not take a snap under center this week. It doesn't. Look, man, I don't mind the Mitchell Evans short yardage stuff in the right spot. I just think that it just got too much there at the end of the season. But I understand why you want a quarterback sneak, right? Like I get it, especially in like the 4th and inches, 3rd and inches type of thing. But you also have a 230-pound battering ram at running back, right? Like just
exactly.
I don't know. Maybe
I would rather have Tyler Buckner under center, and you give Estime a running start, behind the quarterback, and let him have your short yardage. That's. I'm sorry, but the South Carolina front seven doesn't scare me enough that I don't think this offensive line and Audric Estime can pick up a yard. It doesn't.
Yep. I mean, that's where I am too, man. And honestly, I just look. I want Mitchell Evans to develop as a tight end at Notre Dame, right? Like I don't want him to have to be a glorified quarterback sneak artist. Like it's just
exactly.
It's a little counterproductive, and I think that you can allocate responsibilities to different players at a better rates. Chief Brody said, do you think Buckner's bowl performance will hold any weight in them securing Sam Hartman, not from a Notre Dame perspective, from his perspective as a player? Vince, can I just say this?
Yeah.
And this is not even just a Sam Hartman-centric question, right? I think this is more just a transfer portal conversation because we've talked about this before a little bit. I think Notre Dame's going to take a transfer quarterback no matter how – if Tyler Buckner throws for 400 yards – in the bowl game, it looks fantastic. You still take a transfer quarterback because you need depth in that room. I mean, this is the fact of it, folks. I think that we all just kind of had this foregone conclusion that whoever the transfer quarterback is, whether Sam Hartman, whoever else comes in, they are the de facto starting quarterback. And that may end up being the case, but we know for a fact that no quarterback that is in the portal right now that Notre Dame has looked at has been promised a starting spot at Notre Dame. They haven't been promised it. So they're going to have to come in. They're going to have to compete. And there is a possibility where the transfer quarterback next year is a backup to Tyler Buckner when all is said and done. Like that option is still on the table if he is the best man for the job. So I think that it's more about the depth aspect of everything. If you get a great quarterback in the portal that can be your starter and lead you to a lot of victories, it's fantastic. But if Tyler Buckner is the dude and he takes that next step and he's that guy and he's able to stay healthy and you just spend a scholarship on a really good backup quarterback, it's not a bad thing either. So I think for me, it's just more about strengthening the room as a whole, not necessarily just foregone conclusion starter next year.
And I don't see it changing the mind of whoever comes in to Notre Dame as a transfer quarterback either, depending on what happens, because it's one game. I mean, you can, there's a lot. I mean, Spencer Rattler had the game of his life against Tennessee. That doesn't mean he's the world's best quarterback, right? If I'm transferring into Notre Dame and I'm a quarterback and I've been a starter elsewhere and I know that there's now 2.5 games of Tyler Buckner as a starting quarterback at Notre Dame, I still feel like I'm better and I feel like I'm going to come in and compete for the job and win it. So I'm sorry, I don't feel like the play of Tyler Buckner has anything to do with the transfer decision of any quarterback out there. I still think Notre Dame is still a place that guys want to come to, okay?
Right.
And whether it's Sam Hartman or otherwise, somebody's going to come in and they're going to want to start at the University of Notre Dame because it can not only help their draft status, but it can help their pocketbooks as well, being the starter in Notre Dame. So,
I mean, the point blank period to advance, because there's a couple great notes, is that not only as a quarterback or a transfer portal player in general, not been offered starting job right off the bat, right? Like they have to come in and compete. Notre Dame also is having the impact that they have at the transfer portal is also based upon making the academic side work, right? And then also they're not going to offer the handouts. I mean, that's true from the recruiting side and then to the transfer portal side. Notre Dame's not offering a ton of money up front for these players to come play Notre Dame. It's just so if that's the case, I mean, why am I going to guarantee something, right? Like you don't guarantee anything. You say, we really like your film. You come in, you compete. If you're the best guy for the job, you're the best guy. And I think that if it's Sam Hartman or whoever else it is, they have to like their opportunity, right? Like they don't need a guarantee. They just, I mean, the kid, Sam Hartman threw 110 touchdowns in the ACC, right? Like he's a pretty good quarterback.
Right.
I'm sure he isn't worried about competing for a starting job. I'm sure he isn't. It's because he thinks that he's the best guy for the job, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. So
yeah, yep.
All right, good question though, Chief Brody. I think he had a second part, but furthermore, how much weight will you place on the game given how long he has been out? If he has a shocker and lights it up, will it change your opinion on him either way? We'll change the opinion, I think, a little bit. I mean, because I think that we've seen a lack of development. So if he takes a big step forward and has a great game going into the offseason, that's a positive sign for development. But it's not about talent for me, Vince. It's always been about, is he going to be available and is he going to be able to develop? Because he just hasn't been available enough, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to need, if he goes out there, he makes it to the game healthy. He does a lot of the things that we know that he can do, that we've seen him do in practice. He's going through his reads. He's accurate. He's running the ball with confidence. Like, he does all of that. Then I feel maybe more confident about the competition that is going to take place in spring ball, right? I feel like it's going to be a pretty heated competition. If he goes out there, he gets hurt, or he's just not accurate, making some bad decisions and things like that, then I don't know that the competition is going to be as close, because you are building your resume, whether it's positive or negative, right? And I don't want to say that it's make or break, but it's going to be part of the evaluation process. It's going to be part of it, right? So if he does really well, it'll be part of it. If he does really poorly, it's going to be part of it. So, it's going to be part of it. And so we'll see what it looks like. And I'll have plenty to say on that during the post-game show and tell you that, where my confidence level will lie with Tyler Buchner going into the offseason and going into spring ball.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of people in the chat, Vince, also talk about, a transfer quarterback's not coming to sit on the bench. Sure, they don't have that intention.
It's not his anticipation, right?
But if it happens, it happens, right? Like, there's been, you act like there's no quarterback or no player that's ever transferred that didn't win the starting job, right? Of course, that's not the intention. The point is that it's not just being offered out front. The person that comes to Notre Dame at quarterback is going to have to win the job. Like, that's just a point blank period. This isn't one of those Quinn Ewers situations in Texas where no matter how well the guy behind him plays, that he's going to get a fair shake, right? And we know that that's kind of a little bit of the case for what happened in Texas. Quinn Ewers was always going to be the starter. The point is that Notre Dame is not telling the transfer quarterbacks that you are the starter day one, no matter what. It's just not what's happening.
So, he or any other quarterback that's coming to Notre Dame knows there's a possibility that he gets beat out for the starting job. And if you get beat out for the starting job, you're on the bench. Like, they know that that's a possibility coming in. Nothing is being promised. So whoever that guy is knows what is on the table. They know what's at stake.
Yep. It's not like whoever it is can just come in and just stink it up for months and then he's still the starter, right? Like, that's the point. They have to be on their game. They have to play hard. They have to do their job.
That's what certain guys last year wanted to come to Notre Dame. They wanted a promise of being the starter. And Notre Dame wasn't willing to do that, to their credit. And now that particular quarterback is transferring again. So, yeah, I like it.
Can we please not have this Tyler Buchner slander stuff in the chat? Can we just let the kid play and see what happens, man? Jeez. God, I hate this stuff sometimes. All right, going on to Adam Blair. Thank you for the question. Right, is it outrageous to compare Jaden Greathouse to Michael Thomas? I think that Jaden, for me, is a little more of a true inside-out guy than what Michael Thomas is, when he plays anyway. I think he's a little more physical, too. What made Michael Thomas so good when he was healthy for the Saints for the last couple of years is that he just had a really innate sense of spacing and how to get into soft zones and was a consistent catcher of the football. So I get the comparison in that regard, Adam, but I think that for me, Jaden's just a little bit more of an inside-out guy. Like, I don't think he's just a slot receiver at the next level. I think he can play X. Well, in Notre Dame's system, it's not X, but he can play into the boundary. He can play to the field a little bit. He can play in the slot. Just a little bit of a different player, in my opinion. All right, we had another question from We Are Not Marshall Vince. And Vince Ryan, does Tommy Reese the shade on this question? Does Tommy Reese get Tyler Buchner in a groove early, or does he hang the kid out to dry and run a vertical after 2 running plays to make it 3rd and 10?
I mean, he's not going to do that on purpose. I mean, that is not how he's going to set up the offensive game plan, I wouldn't think. So, yes, he is going to try to get Tyler Buchner in a groove early. That's what he did for Drew Pine. I believe that's what he will do for Tyler Buchner. So, No, I do not think that is what he's going to do. Run the ball twice, throw it vertical, and that's it. So,
yes.
But,
Yes.
I'm sure if it's not the perfect game plan, if it's not the perfect called game that, Tommy Rees is going to.
We'll hear about it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, we'll hear about it. And
yep.
Man, I mean, I was at the Marshall game, so you're making me relive this right now. We are not Marshall, but we'll move on. We had from Milton Fan, we had a super chat.
Oh,
Thank
super
you,
chat.
Milton Fan.
Woo-hoo.
Yep. So, do we see more 3-5-3 going forward for Notre Dame? So 3-3-5, yes. So three down linemen, 3 linebackers, 5 defensive backs. I think we will see a little bit more of that moving forward. 3-5-3 is a completely different animal, though. That's 5 linebackers on the field or 5 second level defenders. It's just a little bit different than what a 3-3-5 is. But I think with how Notre Dame is recruiting, I think it would make a lot of sense. Brian Driscoll made a great point about this. I guess it was on yesterday's show, or maybe it was the Saturday show, about maybe that's their move, is that they're moving more to a 3-3-5 type of alignments, because I think that you now have some edge rushers, mainly in like a Joshua Burnham vein, that is more of a hybrid, true hybrid player that can play a little bit more off ball, can play on ball at points. And then you're getting a lot longer on the defensive line in the 2023 class and then moving forward. So I don't know, Vince. I think there might be some more 3-3-5 implications, because that is what Marcus Freeman did a lot at Cincinnati. So he does like that type of stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yep.
And I know that the ire of Notre Dame Nation gets all upset when they see 3 down linemen. I get it. Mm-hmm. Especially when you're getting run on a good amount. So if you're going to run the 3-3-5, you need to be able to stop the run. And, if they're going to do it, they need to be able to stop the run. So we'll see what happens. And, not having Isaiah Foskey, maybe we see a little bit more of that. I mean, it's definitely a possibility, but I still think their base is going to be 4 down.
Yep. Yep. And I think the 3-3-5, to your question, Milton Fan, is a very easy adjustment to get to 4 down linemen as a 4-2-5 alignment. So appreciate the question. And then he also had a question, Vince. It's just Milton Fan asked, does Chris Tyree get more reps in the bowl game?
Just depends on the game plan, and it depends on how they want to attack the South Carolina defense, because I do think Notre Dame is a faster team than South Carolina, and I think they can make some waves on the outside. I mean, Will Shipley had a lot of success on the outside of the offense, right? And I can tell you right now that Chris Tyree is faster than Will Shipley. So if you can get him the ball outside, I think Tyree can have some success out there. So it just depends on how they want to go after it and how they want to attack this defense. Again, I still think running right at these guys is the way to go, but you need to go inside, outside. You need to switch it up. And so, yeah, I would love to see Tyree get some more reps. There's no doubt about it.
I would love to see some 2-back stuff in the bowl game and see Chris Tyree run a little bit more outside, and then you get the hammer down inside with Diggs and Estime. That's what I would love to see, but what will we see? I don't know, man. We'll see on Friday.
Yep.
All right, and then we have the last question here, Vince, unless we get a couple more that come in late. Corey Schmida? Apologize, Corey, if I'm pronouncing that wrong. How much of your hesitancy with the passing game is related to the coordination of it? That was to my point earlier about, what I'm expecting from the passing game. I mean, Corey, it's part of it, right? I mean, Look, I think that for me, some people always are like, you have to be on one side of the conversation, or you have to be on the other, right? Like there's never any middle ground. But I think that there is a true middle ground here, because part of it is Tyler Buchner's inexperience, and he didn't play very well. He played bad the last time we saw him against Marshall, right? Like that's part of the hesitancy. The other part of the hesitancy is that you don't have your best offensive player in Michael Mayer in this game. So you have uncertainty at wide receiver. Talent, for sure, which is why there's a lot of optimism. But there's not a lot of proven commodities at wide receiver right now. That's part of the hesitancy. And then, yes, part of the hesitancy is, do I trust Tommy Rees's offense to open it up? I'm hopeful that it happens, but until I see it, I can't say that it's going to happen, right? So is it a part of the hesitancy? Absolutely. Is it the majority of it? No, it's really not. The majority of it is everything combined. That's just my standpoint on it.
Yep. A couple more quarterback questions, and then we'll get out of here, Ryan. Yep. Here's one from John Banco. Percentage of snaps that Steve Angeli will get. He will get the same amount of percentage of snaps that every number 2 quarterback gets. I don't think this is going to be a timeshare situation. I think it's a 1-2 situation. So the only way Steve Angeli is getting snaps is if Notre Dame's winning by a lot. And I mean, is that possible? Yes.
Yeah.
I think if I set the number at 5%, I think I'm taking the under.
Man, I don't know what the percentage would be, but I think you make a good point, Vince. At first, when we heard that Tyler Buchner was going to play, my immediate response was that it's going to be a little bit of a timeshare at quarterback and Steve's going to play a ton. But just with what we're hearing and just kind of some of the comments from Marcus Freeman, I do think that this is Tyler's game, man.
Yeah,
I do think it's his game. And then if Steve's needed, Steve's needed. So I hope he gets some playing time, because if he gets playing time in this game, that probably means that you have a good outcome, most likely,
yes.
more likely than not. So I hope we see him a little bit, but I'm not sure. I'm really not.
I mean, if Tyler Buchner gets hurt, Steve Angeli plays. I mean, this is a very simple question to answer. I mean, he's the number 2 quarterback. If he gets hurt, then number 2 guy comes in. I mean, that's just the way it is. I do feel like this is a strict number 1, number 2 situation. I don't think there's going to be like an Angeli package or anything like that. So, and then the last one that I starred right here from Jason Smith. Do you think it helped Tyler Buchner being in the box with Tommy Rees to see things how Tommy Rees sees them, a different perspective where he can see the whole field?
I think that can help tremendously, in my opinion, Vince, because I mean, I always see this with like quarterbacks making the transition from college to the NFL sometimes, is that some guys need to just play football, right? And need the live bullets and need that experience. But then there's other quarterbacks that need to sit back and watch the game from a different vantage point. So I think it can help for sure. I think seeing how Tommy calls a game, what he's trying to do in like real time, I think that can help tremendously. And I think also just the general vantage point of seeing it from a different lens can help quarterbacks sometimes. So I hope it does, but I think that can help you definitely get a deeper grasp of what is expected and what you're trying to accomplish as a quarterback.
And to understand also the thought process for Tommy Rees behind what he's calling and why he's calling it and when he's calling it. I think there is something to be said for that when the quarterback and the coordinator are on the same page. I think that there's part of that as well. So I think there's no way it could have hurt. I mean, it's only positive, in my opinion. So only positive.
Absolutely. So I think we had a couple more roll in here, man. It seems, huh?
We did. Yeah, we did. Just a couple goofball questions, frankly, which I'm all good with.
D-Troll Hunter said, "What did you each get for Christmas?" Vince, you still get presents, man? I know you gotta feed an army over there, man. So
yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, and We Are Not Marshall just about hit it on the head. He said Vince probably got underwear, socks, and a Notre Dame coffee mug. Definitely got underwear. Definitely got that kind of stuff because I'm a dad. I mean, I've been married for almost 20 years. I have 5 kids. That's when I get new stuff like that. So I'm always excited about the socks and underwear. There's no doubt about that. And then I got cash from people because I need to upgrade my business casual wardrobe, going from being a gym teacher to being an administrator. The wardrobe was very small and I already wore out my dress shoes. And so I needed to get some new dress shoes. So got some money towards those and put an order in yesterday. So hopefully those are going to be some good ones. So what about you? What'd you get?
I mean, it was a very daughter-centric Christmas this year,
sure.
But I mean, pretty much the same, man. You know, new boxers, socks, shoes, like that type of stuff. Got some moccasins, got some new hoodies. Like, so pretty much just clothes.
Yep.
You know?
And I'm cool with that. Like I don't like shopping. And so if my wife says, yeah, you'll look good in this. Okay. Sounds good. Like I'm good with that.
My mother-in-law did give me one of those. It's like those waterproof speakers that you listen to like in the shower. So that'll be nice. Be able to listen to podcasts.
Yeah, you can re-listen to the podcast in the shower.
Oh, I never listen to a podcast that I'm on, man. I hate listening to my voice. It's not my thing. Not my thing at all.
I hear you. But the most important thing, and I'm not saying this to be cheesy, the kids had a great Christmas. I'm sure your daughter had a great Christmas. That's what makes me happy. That's what makes me smile. And my wife puts in so much work to make sure Christmas is good for the kids. It is an absolute fact that I sit there and watch my kids open presents from mom and dad, and I have no idea what is being opened. I'm like, wow, that's really cool, because my wife does all the work behind the scenes. So I got to give her a heck of a lot of credit for making sure Christmas runs as smooth as possible.
Well,
yeah.
Vince, it was cool for us because my daughter's about to turn 2 in January. So last year, like she kind of understood Christmas, like the Santa thing, but not 100%. This year, dude, she was like, Santa, open. Oh, what's this? Open. Like, all right.
That is awesome.
Gotcha.
That is awesome. Our house, it's like,
Yeah.
hey, did I get the same amount of gifts as this one? Did I get the same amount as that one? It's a very much a competition. Make sure everybody's, equal and
like on Christmas. So Christmas morning, we went over my in-laws. She got a lot of presents there, but my parents came over later in the day. And my mom is an Italian mom. So like, she goes overboard with everything she does. Love her, but she goes overboard with everything. She got her so many presents. Halfway through, my daughter literally got up, walked out of the room, and just like needed to sit down for a minute. And she's like, this is like overloaded with presents, man. It was just wild.
Awesome.
Never seen a child walk away from presents like that, man.
Good for your mom.
Funny.
Good for your mom, just inundating her with presents. That is awesome. That is awesome. So, all right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. I actually have a family bowling get together to get to in between Irish Breakdown shows. So I will be back at 6:00 with Sean Stiers for IB Nation Sports Talk. That is going to be our only IB Nation Sports Talk show, I believe, this week. So make sure you tune in at 6:00. I will probably have a sore right hand from bowling, but I'm about to go meet the family at the bowling alley. So make sure you check out the message board, hit the like button, subscribe, and the notification bell. Share this podcast, and of course, leave a 5-star review. I love Mace AK and what he does for us, and just he gets us out of here really well. So visit the IB merch store because there's always some great merch over there. So some belated Christmas presents, some New Year's presents, if you will. So make sure you hit that. So for Ryan, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast.